Thank you so much, Jim, for that way too long introduction. It's just a little longer than my talk. But there was only one error in your introduction. Gilbert is not a quarterly. Gilbert magazine is the world's only month and a half late. So you should get it just for that. But other than that, it is the best magazine in the world. Well, okay, this is not an introductory talk on Chesterton. For those of you who need an introduction to G.K. Chesterton, I have lots of books out there to introduce you, and I insist that you avail yourself to them if you haven't really read anything of Chesterton's at all, or any introductory works, because he is someone that you do need to get to know. He is in many ways a prophet for our time, and possibly even a saint for our time. Chesterton himself said that the age is converted by the saint who contradicts it the most. And he certainly does that. But everything about the Catholic Church contradicts the age. And it had better. Because the world's going one way, the church is going the other. And we really have to turn things around in our own culture, in our own society, because there's only one other direction it can go. And the thing about a prophet is this, that a prophet really wants to be wrong. The prophet isn't telling you what is absolutely going to happen without fail. The prophet is telling you what will happen if we don't repent, change our ways. Every prophet is saying the same words as Isaiah. Seek the Lord while he may be found, and call upon him while he is near. And let the wicked forsake his ways, and the unrighteous man his thoughts, and return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy and abundantly pardon. And that's what the message of the prophet. It's always one of hope, and it's because it's one of hope, it's one of joy. And G.K. Chesterton is one of the most hopeful and most joyful writers that you ever encounter in this culture of death, in this culture of doom and gloom. Because as Chesterton says, hope means hoping when things are hopeless, or it's no virtue at all. So in 1910, over 100 years ago, G.K. Chesterton wrote a book called What's Wrong with the World? He was originally going to just call it What's Wrong, but a woman stopped and visited him at his home while he was writing it, and she asked him what he was doing. He said, well, I've been doing what's wrong. The book is probably more timely now than when he wrote it, because he identified four things that are wrong with the world. Big government, big business, feminism, and public education. Now, the thing about big government and big business is that they are connected, or I should say, the thing about feminism and public education is they're connected to the other two. Feminism, as Chesterton says, is not about women fulfilling their highest potential, because women have been doing that for a long time. And women, he says, have always been able to do all the things that men can do. Usually they do them a lot better. But the one thing that women can do that men cannot do is be a mother. And feminism, as Chesterton identified, has always been an attack on motherhood. And that's why so many feminists are promoters of abortion. But his whole point about feminism is that they weren't accomplishing anything close to equal rights with what they wanted to do. They were simply dupes of big business. Chesterton says, 10,000 women marched through the streets saying, we will not be dictated to, and they went off and became stenographers. And of course, his whole idea of the way the family's supposed to work. It's if you take the mother out of the home, you don't have a home. But his other complaint is if you take the father out of the home, you also don't have a home. The economy, the society, the culture should be based on the family. And even business should be based on the family. And business, wage slavery, breaks up the family. But that's just one part of the equation. Because the other thing is public education, which also breaks up the family. Chesterton said, when we gave the government the power to educate our children, we gave the government more power than it ever had in the history of the world. He said, the state had less power over a man when it could send him to be burnt at the stake than it does now when it sends him to the public school. Because we are putting the state in charge of forming the minds of our children at their most malleable time, their most formative, their most essential, important time in their lives. They are in the hands of the state, which is simply not even allowed to educate them because it has to take God out of the equation. And you can't teach anything unless you teach faith, because faith is what is the cohesive element that holds every other truth together. The system of public education, Chesterton says, is basically trying one new theory after another. He said our children are exposed to educational theories that are younger than they are. He said that 100 years ago. And that trend has only continued as we just keep trying the latest fad and the latest trend and the newest something. And this is exactly why, as Catholics, we have to stand up and affirm a classical education, to teach the truths that have been grasped and appreciated and passed on from one generation to the other. Because that's all education is. It's passing the truth from one generation to the other. That's what the definition of education is. Passing the truth from one generation to the other. And if we fail to do that, we are not educating anybody. We can't object, Chesterton says, to teachers being dogmatic. He says if they're not being dogmatic, they're not teaching. And he says there are two kinds of people. There are those who are dogmatic and know it, and those who are dogmatic and don't know it. Because everybody believes something. If they don't believe anything, they should not be teaching. But the problem is, so many teachers don't know what it is they even believe. And he says that's the problem with our society. We can't articulate what the truth is, but we will teach it to our children. And so he is very much the model for the school that I helped get started back in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I flew in this morning from Minneapolis at 6 o'clock, and I flew from London to Minneapolis yesterday and arrived there. So I just want you to, if there's anything you don't understand in this talk, it's your fault. Because you're not working hard enough to fill in the words in the places where they're missing, okay? So just really pay attention and work hard out there. It's part of the, what is this thing, imagination or something? Yeah. I mean, if you're, the whole idea of live theater is that the audience participates in the creative act. And you have to be doing that. And you'll come away thinking, boy, that was a great talk, because you worked so hard to understand it. And Chesterton's point is that, first of all, education has to be in the hands of the family. It doesn't mean that the parents cannot send their children to a school. Of course we can do that. But the school has to be answerable to the parent. The teacher is in loco parentis, in the place of the parent. The parent gives that teacher an awful authority by saying, yes, I'm giving you the authority to educate my child. That's a huge responsibility the teacher takes on. But the point is the teacher and the parent are in it together then. And it's not that we're simply handing off our children to the teacher, it's that we're saying, okay, you're going to help me educate my child, and I am going to help you educate the child as well. We're going to work together on this, because it's in both of our interests to give that child the best education possible. So, but if the family is not invested in the education, well, then the teacher's job also is triply difficult. And that's another problem with our public schools today, is that the parents have gotten this mentality that I'm just handing the child off, and they take this very passive role in their children's formation. They leave it up to the teacher, to the public school. It used to be the public boards of education were answerable to the parents because they were elected by the parents. They had to be accountable to the parents because they were all locally controlled. But the farther we get away from that local control, the more that the state or the federal government takes over what is taught, the school board is not even serving a function anymore. And there's very little local control over what is taught, and therefore the parents are not being represented by the teachers. The teachers are not representing the parents. So with classical education, the first thing is that we make this partnership with the parents, because if the family still is the primary educator, and when when a Catholic family takes control of their children's education, they're going to have a strong family. If you have a strong family, then you have a strong society. If you have a weak family, you have a weak society. Chesterton says that in the new dark ages which we are entering, the difference from the previous dark ages was that in the old dark ages, it was the monasteries that preserved education and preserved culture and preserved learning and preserved art. As really the world fell into barbarianism, civilization really crumbled from the late 4th century till the 9th century, when the Middle Ages and the Catholic culture started putting the civilization back together again. The only light in the dark ages, says Chesterton, was the church. And it was the monasteries that preserved culture. But in the new dark ages, which we are entering, as the barbarians continue to take over, he says the institution which is going to have to save the culture is the family. It's the family that's going to have to protect learning, because the schools aren't doing it, and there are no monasteries to do it anymore. Chesterton says these educational institutions that we've trusted to preserve culture aren't doing it because they've lost their way. And he says man has always lost his way. The problem is now he's lost his address. And most parents know this. Most teachers know it. Even the teachers in the public school know that the system is broken and it's just not working. But they put up with the miserable conditions of the modern world, and they try to adjust themselves to those conditions rather than changing the conditions of the modern world to suit the soul better. We have to go out there and fix things. One of the main problems with the philosophy of modern education is the separation of everything from everything else. We've taken all the subjects, all the disciplines, and we've got all these specialists, and nobody's talking to each other or communicating with each other, and the students don't get what the connection is between something they learn in one class and something they learn in the other class. Because, as Chesterton says, the world is one wild divorce court. Everything has been separated from everything else. It's all these fragments that we are giving our students. Fragments of the truth, which in some cases isn't even the truth. But there's no philosophy to hold it together. There's certainly no theology to hold it together. There's no relevancy to what is being taught in one room to the other. And so our children learn in fragments, and they start thinking in fragments. And if you'll listen, you'll hear them talking in fragments. The loss of the complete sentence. The reduction of all vocabulary to the word like. When I got off the plane yesterday, we had to take you put your passport in the machine and it prints out an entry pass and it takes your picture. And the girl behind me said, "It took a picture of like my face." Such a misplaced word. Chesterton says, the one thing that is never taught by any chance in the atmosphere of our public schools is this, that there is a whole truth of things, and that in knowing it and speaking it, we are happy. I'll say it again. Frank Sheed says if you want to get anything across, you have to say it 3 times. Because the first time someone will say, "Ah, that's interesting." The second time you say it, they'll go, "Oh, I've heard this somewhere before." And then the third time you say it, they go, "You know, this guy's pretty smart. He thinks the same way I do." The one thing that is never taught by any chance in the atmosphere of public schools is this, that there is a whole truth of things, and that in knowing it and speaking it, we are happy. That's what we want to teach our children, the whole truth of things, so that they can be happy. We want to teach them the truth well enough so that they can know it and speak it. I will say it a third time, but later. Now, Chesterton's referring to public schools. The problem is that the private schools are just imitating the public schools. They're just doing the same thing, only cost a little more. But they really have just taken the same system of separating everything from everything else. And it might be done on a more high level, but it's the same problem that they're not teaching a whole truth of things. And of course, the really tragic thing is that the Catholic schools have come just to imitate the public schools and the other private schools, the latest trends, the latest fads in education, and not teaching the whole truth, which they have. But they've relegated the truth that they have to one class, if they even teach it there. It's just one class, there's theology, and then they teach everything else, which just looks like what's taught in any other school. In 1937, the president of the University of Chicago, Robert Hutchins, addressed the National Catholic Education Association. And he said that the Catholic Church possessed the longest intellectual tradition of any institution in the world. And yet Catholic education in the United States had done nothing but imitate the worst features of secular education. That was in 1937. And unfortunately, Catholic education has done nothing but imitate secular education even more in the intervening years, even to the point where our Catholic schools have adopted the Common Core. People ask me, well, Dale, what would Chesterton say about the Common Core? And I say, I don't put words in Chesterton's mouth, he puts words in my mouth. That's how that works, okay? But this is what he would say. He'd say it's not common and it's not the core. But he did say something quite prophetic regarding the Common Core. In 1927, he gave a lecture called Culture and the Coming Peril. Warning us about an evil. Evil, he says, I'm trying to warn you about, is not excessive democracy, it's not excessive ugliness, it's not excessive anarchy. It's simply this, It's standardization by a low standard. I don't even have to say that one 2 more times. So what's the solution? Well, I'm not going to give you too much theory here. I'll just tell you what I had the privilege of being part of when I helped get Chesterton Academy started. Because we realized that we had a problem, a real simple problem. We didn't know where we were going to send our kids to high school. It's amazing what creative solutions there are when it comes to your own children's education. That's when the creative imagination kicks in. A gentleman, a friend of mine from my parish, we had a very good parish school. Gentleman and I were saying, they could just extend this school 4 more years. That's all they got to do. Just stay right here. Just 4 more years, done. We went to the pastor, I can't do that. We had breakfast together. I said, I know what we'll do. We'll start our own high school. How hard can it be? It's so great that God doesn't show you the future. But it was really one of the best decisions we ever made. It was also great just for the expression on my wife's face when I came home and told her, we're going to start a high school. Because now I know what my face looked like every time she said, we're going to have a baby. Okay. So we knew if we were going to start a high school, it had to be based on one thing. It had to be based on the incarnation. That's the one truth that had to inform every other truth that we taught. As Chesterton said, there is only one subject. And every other thing we teach somehow comes back to that truth. When we teach history, we are teaching the history of salvation. When we teach literature, we're basically teaching the story of salvation as it's been retold. The story of the fall. The story of redemption, of the love of God. When we're studying science, we are studying creation. When we're studying art, we're studying creation. Because God made us in his own image, and part of that image is that we are creators. And we get to do creation when we do art. But when we study what other artists have done, we see the incarnational act at work. Because all art is about the Word becoming flesh. It's taking an idea and making it visible, making it tangible. Philosophy is about that thing called wisdom that Solomon writes about. That wonderful thing, wisdom that God created, that was always present with him. But then we show how these things fit together. So that science and art are connected to each other. And we do just the opposite of what our schools do today. So if a student starts showing an inclination towards math and science, he's just shuttled off in that direction. We're going to make an engineer out of this kid. And if he starts being a little creative, starts drawing a little bit, put him off over there. He's going to be an artist and starve. And the whole point is that you've got to develop both sides of the brain and put those two together, because art and science are both about creation, but they're both about beauty, about design, about proportion, about understanding what the role of observation is in seeing what's out there. So we teach our kids how to draw and paint. They all learn how to draw and paint. By their 4th year, they are copying oil masterpieces. Because You have to see what's really there. You don't give a kid a colored craft and just draw whatever you want. No, he said, this is what you're going to draw. It's going to look like that when you're done drawing it. So we start with basic drawing, and then we do show color and shading, and then the develop oil masterpieces. Same thing with science. You have to see what's out there, to study what's out there, understand it. What's interesting about engineering is that engineering schools don't want just math and science nerds. We had 3 of our graduates last year get into good engineering schools, and they were even told the reason you're here is because, yeah, you're good in math and science, but because you were in a play, because you played the piano, because you're artistic, because they want engineers to be whole people. People, the world wants the complete thinker. And so we develop both of those things. Math and philosophy go together. Math and philosophy go together. Because they're both about reason. And faith and reason go together. And so we start right away with the pre-Socratic philosophers in 9th grade and Plato, and then Aristotle. And by 11th grade, they're reading Thomas Aquinas. They're seeing how Aristotle was christened by the church. And when do I stop talking? What time is my talk? Does anybody know? Okay. Tell me when it stops. Then I'll say that one sentence again, so I've said it 3 times. All right. I'll just have someone tell me. All right. So the integrated approach. We teach Latin because a student who studies Latin understands math better. All those math terms are Latin terms, but also Latin's a logical language. And a kid who learns Latin does better in math. I was interviewed by a psychologist once, and he says, "Explain why that is, Dale." And I said to the psychologist, "I don't have to explain anything to you." Then I looked over my shoulder. I always get paranoid around those guys. I don't know why it is. I started biting my nails. But it really is amazing how that integration works. And all of our kids learn how to sing. We do 4 years of choir. Because, they should play an instrument, but every one of the kids brings an instrument to school with them every day. And so we develop his voice, we develop their ability to sing together, and they put on several choral concerts a year, and we also teach them chanting. So part of Latin is learning how to chant, and so they chant at every Mass. And speaking of Mass, we have Mass every day. We start the day with Mass, and the day centers around the incarnation that way too, of the Word becoming flesh. 4 years of theology. So we teach Old Testament, New Testament, the early church fathers, and the catechism of the faith. And so the Old Testament is tied with the ancient history we're teaching and the ancient philosophy. And there's an integration that takes place that way too. So there's both a vertical and a horizontal structure to everything that we're teaching. But it is classical. We teach the great works because, as Chesterton says, if we're going to expand education, we really have to expand it until it includes the older and wiser things. What makes a classic is that it's a universal truth that has been expressed, and it continues to be true, age after age. We study the Odyssey because all life is a journey. We study the Iliad because all life is a battle. We study the book of Job because all life is a riddle about suffering. We study Dante because you learn from Dante that if you pursue evil, it'll take you to a very dark place. But if you want to get to heaven, it's going to be a climb, because virtue is going to require a lot of work. But we also learn in Dante that there is a love that steers the stars. So it comes back to science. Everyone mentions Socrates, says Chesterton, as a man who dies because he was a bold exponent of new truths. But if you look closer, you'll see something else. Socrates lived in a world of sophists. And there were hundreds and hundreds of men proving that there was no God, no conscience. There were multitudes of anarchists around Socrates. He was the conservative who subdued them. He turned sophistry against the sophist. And Socrates is remembered, and the rest are forgotten. It's the one who stands up and says the bold truths that don't change. Who may suffer for his bold statement, but he will be remembered because it's his job to state those truths. It's his job to carry those truths from one generation to the other. We put faith and reason together because they don't contradict each other. And you have to give your children both. You have to give them a foundation of faith and reason and show that they don't contradict each other. As Father Brown, Chesterton's great character, says in one of the stories, when he exposes a fraudulent priest, he could tell that the priest wasn't a real priest because he said, "You attacked reason, and that's bad theology." You only get one chance to educate your children. A lot of parents are nonchalant about this. They've simply resigned themselves to settle for a school that they know is not right for their children. We have a great responsibility to create the right kind of schools to serve the Catholic people of this country and turn this country around. We have to get away from the dependence on state education. And we have to get away from education's dependence on government, because the two of them just keep feeding each other. We have to be not afraid to go against the stream. Chesterton says it's the dead thing that goes with the stream. Only the living thing can go against it. If you think wrong, says Chesterton, you go wrong. We have to teach students how to think. Give them the tool of how to think. Part of learning how to think is simply learning grammar, learning basic grammar. Because after all, it was the Word that became flesh, right? And so every word tells a story. Language matters. Teach our children how to express the truth. And then give them not only the tools of knowing the truth, but the ability to stand up and declare it. That's why we teach drama and speech. That's why we teach drama and speech. My wife is our drama teacher at our school. She says drama is the most Christian of all the arts, because it's learning about how to die to yourself and rise up as someone who has been a role that's been created for you by another author. That's what happens in the Christian life. We die to ourselves and we rise as a new person that God has created us to be. That's what the actor has to do. He has to leave himself behind when he comes out on stage. We require every child has to go out on that stage 3 times. There's 3 plays they have to be in. And if they just change, they are transformed. These shy kids, they realize that they can express themselves, and it gives them a freedom, a power that they didn't know that they had. And they're so more confident than, every year it happens. Can you catch me with where I don't have to say anything? And by the end of the play, it's like, next year I want more than 14 lines. Every year. It's wonderful. She also points out that drama is in many ways better than any team sport. That it's a group of people working together cohesively, and the small roles are just as important as as the big roles, because it's like the body of Christ. If the small member fails, the whole body suffers. And so everyone is there working together. Just the classes all bond together when they put on a play together. They become so close to each other. It's not just the kids who try out for the play. They're all in the play. They're going to be graded on their participation. So they're all going to be working a lot harder. We've just relegated the arts to some second-class position in our schools. And what has been more influential in our society than anything else is the entertainment industry. And what are we doing to transform entertainment? We're doing nothing. The church is doing nothing. But we can start by teaching our students about music and drama and performance and creativity, so maybe we can start creating the art that will transform the society. And as I say, we have to have parent involvement. We try to keep our schools affordable, because the other great scandal about education is how it's too expensive. It's just a scandal. And we just have found creative ways to keep our costs down, but there's still going to be the pain of fundraising, because by not being dependent on that trough of state money, well, it gives you a lot of chances to be creative. But also, we're much more careful about how we spend money. It's just the money that has been thrown into this vast vat of education that's unaccounted for. It's criminal. It's just absolutely criminal. And so we find ways to save money, and we get parents to help tow part of the work by volunteering and helping out in any way they can. That's what helps keep the cost down. But the other thing about keeping the cost down is we call ourselves a pro-family school. And if we are too expensive, then we are not pro-family. We are not supporting large families if our tuition is prohibitive. The motto of Chesterton Academy is Cultura Vitae, culture of life. So we're trying to have that pro-family charism to do battle with the culture of death, but also by keeping the education affordable. We're teaching what is right, what is true, and what is good, and what is beautiful. And you throw in the daily mass, regular confession, religious retreats, pro-life activism, pilgrimages. Our students have been transformed. We're watching these lives being changed in front of us, and there's just nothing more rewarding. We started as an independent school. Last year, the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis came to us and said, Dale, we want you to be an official Catholic school. And we never saw it, but they came and saw us, and it was exactly what I hoped would happen. And why did they come to us? Because we were sending them vocations, that's why. This year, 4 of our graduates are entering minor seminary. And we already have 2 that are there already, so this will be 6. And the kids are getting into the colleges of their choices. We've had 4 National Merit Scholars. It's a success story, and it's still new. We're still doing it. We're only been around 8 years, but in that time, parents from around the country have come to us and said, Dale, how can we do what you're doing? And we say, well, here's how we did it. And, I can't tell you how pleased I am we now have fellow laborers around the country who have started Chesterton Academies. We've got 2 of them are here today. We've got the Rochester Chesterton Academy and Milwaukee Chesterton Academy are here today. There's 7 other schools that have gotten started, more in the works, and they're all being independently grassroots. We're not planting them. They're coming to us, and we're just helping them do it. It's a great system. I still can't believe how it's happened, in spite of our participation. I tell you, our chairman of the board said we were rubbing 2 sticks together. and all of a sudden there's a group of people standing around us trying to keep warm. All right. The one thing that is never taught by any chance in the atmosphere of public schools is this, that there is a whole truth of things, and that in knowing it and speaking it, we are happy. Join with me in teaching the whole truth of things, my friends. God bless you. Time for one question maybe, and then we have that breakout session later on, so you can come and ask some more questions at that. And then you can certainly buy books, which I'm sort of going to be requiring you to do. You know, I'm really tired, and carrying that heavy suitcase back home is not something I can do. I can't do it physically. All right. Any questions?
Question. Seems like
It's very exciting, the model you have for high school, but it seems like it might, in some sense, presuppose a certain educational formation prior to 9th grade. Can you talk about getting students who are prepared for the education, or preparing them once they get there and just overcoming that challenge?
Sure, that's a good question. We have students come into the school who come in at all different levels of preparation. And some who have had some classical K through 8 training, and a lot of homeschoolers get some classical elements, if not a complete classical education, depending upon the program that they're using, and then some with none, zero. And so we have that great challenge of how to adjust to those different levels of formation coming in. Naturally, it'd be great if they came in with some Latin under their belt and some good math training under their belts. But some don't. And so we do have to do some two-track system with certain subjects that we're doing. And math is probably the most obvious one, because you have some coming in with a high level of math preparation, some don't. But the same thing with Latin, some do and some don't. But generally with the literature, with the philosophy, the kids get all really on the same track by the end of the first year. So even though some may have a head start with some of those with the literature, with some, most kids haven't had any philosophy coming in, so that's going to be new for all of them.
Hi, I have heard of schools who have the hardest time finding art teachers. And you have such a beautiful art program that requires a knowledge of art instruction that also has been lost. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, we're hopefully creating some more art teachers. I think some of our students will end up teaching art. In fact, one of our very first graduates is teaching art right now, and so hopefully part of it's amazing how these things develop. We're trying to develop a program called Teach for Christ, so that some of our students, when they get out of college, will donate a year or two of their lives to teach at a Catholic school, hopefully a Chesterton Academy school, on basically a Peace Corps salary, and so that they will give something back that way. And so hopefully we're training some of the future teachers, especially things like art, and the things that are unique to our curriculum. But yeah, you bring up a great problem. It's a great, art has been lost. Yeah.
One more question.
How do you incorporate the classical education into your PE program?
Yeah, we teach dancing. The kids do enough PE just during we create free time. They're out there shooting. We do have a sports program. They have, we do cheap sports like basketball and soccer and track and stuff. If it's football, that's a religious thing, and that you have to go to a religious school where football's a religion at that one, and that's where you go there. But that's one of the ways you want to keep tuition down. You don't have football or hockey. And in Minnesota, that's almost sacrilegious to not have hockey. But for the PE classes we teach dancing. We teach ballroom dancing and swing dancing, and we've been trying to do some fencing. We're still working on that too. Yeah. All right, thank you again. God bless.
All right, just a couple quick announcements. Presenters and audience members, please help to remember to start those recorders before those workshops begin. And then anyone taking the shuttle, anyone either getting a boxed dinner and or taking the shuttles, come back here to the Bruder Center right around 4 o'clock. The shuttles will start going at 4:15.